Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my new video. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the meeting between Kallas and Wang Yi. And this was regarding trade between China and EU. And a lot of interesting comments came out of this meeting, and I wanted to discuss it with you guys. Before I talk further, don't forget to watch the video fully. It does help if you watch the video from start to end. And also try and put a comment, like all that stuff does help with algorithm. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. So this meeting happened a few days ago, and you can see from the start of the meeting, I don't know if you guys study body language, but you can see Kalas with her body language. She's reaching out with her hand, and Wang Yi is keeping his hands close to his chest. So what does this tell you? This tells you that the EU is actually reaching out for help, and Wang Yi is showing that he does not need EU because he's keeping his hands close to his chest. His posture is very, very good, and Wang Yi is a very seasoned minister, and he's well respected around the world, and he's been around a long time alongside Lavrov of Russia. Lavrov and Wang Yi are probably the most two distinguished gentlemen in the international stage. So he's very experienced. You can see Callas here is not very experienced. She's reaching out with her hand, with a handshake that's not, which is very unnatural, and it shows that she is reaching out for help. And it is correct because EU is reaching out for help from China. They want to get as much money as and help from China as possible and not give anything back and probably even stab China any chance they can get. So what was discussed in this meeting? So I can tell you that few things were discussed. One of the main issues that came out of this meeting, I think it's all over the Western headlines, it said that Callas accused Wang Yi of saying that we cannot afford to, we cannot afford for Russia to lose the war in Ukraine because once Russia has lost, the world, EU and NATO and America will come after China next. So this is what Callas has accused Wang Yi of saying. I don't think Wang Yi has said it in those particular words because Wang Yi is a very experienced foreign minister. He wouldn't say anything like that, but he may have hinted at something like that privately, um, which is true. I mean, what he said is true, 100% true. If Russia loses the war in Ukraine, the West, EU, NATO, everybody will come after China. China will be the final boss. And Wang Yu is also right that, Russia is keeping NATO and the Europeans busy, and while China can carry on developing and focusing on its interests as well, like Taiwan and other things as well, and building its economy. So Callas has always been a very anti-Chinese diplomat. She's very new in the EU, but she's Estonian and she's very much anti-Chinese. Some of her statements in the past have been very anti-Chinese, and you can tell she does not like China. She's very much in line with von der Leyen. Von der Leyen is also an anti-Chinese puppet, and both Callas and von der Leyen report to United States. United States basically run EU foreign policy as well as Israel as well. So what was discussed in this meeting? I mean, first of all, I wanted to I've been reading a lot of articles in China and also what was said in the meetings, also the Western papers. And from what I can see that Wang Yi has actually embarrassed EU. He gave EU a lot of harsh truths, which the EU probably didn't like or couldn't handle it. So, it, I mean, this wasn't his own words, but I can interpret what he actually said. He said that EU needs to grow some balls, basically. In layman terms, EU has been a puppet of the United States for a very long time. EU doesn't have its own voice. It completely is subservient to what the United States wants EU to be. It doesn't have its own voice. And Wang Yi has said that if EU wants to survive, it needs to have its own voice and it needs to grow some balls in the international stage. So he gave some examples. He gave some examples, for example, like the attack on Iran, in the nuclear facilities. EU has basically said exactly what the Americans have wanted them to say, and also the Israelis, despite attacking nuclear facilities, which is really detrimental to humanity. He also gave examples to Gaza. He said EU is allowing this genocide to take place, and nobody in EU is speaking out, and they are basically saying what the Israelis want them to say and what the Americans want them to say. And also, he said the Americans have been using the EU to fight Russia, and again, the EU have kind of dumped themselves in a really bad situation with Russia, where they are they are about to lose, but the EU is still doubling down on on all its policies rather than negotiating a truce or a settlement with Russia. So Wang Yi has given EU a lot of harsh truths. Wang Yi has also said the EU is not what it used to be before. It's not a powerful bloc anymore. The euro is tumbling down as well as the dollar. He said the EU is deindustrializing. So the EU needs China now more than ever, and he also needs Russia. He also said that the Americans have started this war with Russia, proxy war, and they've basically now Trump and his team is now kind of pulling out from support of Ukraine. They are not going to give the money and the weapons, so the EU are going to be dumped with it. So Wang Yi has given a lot of harsh truths to the EU, and the EU probably don't know how to handle it. They are absolutely panicking. And Wang Yi has also said that EU needs China. So EU needs to decide what it wants to do, whether they want to be puppets of the Americans for the rest of their lives and get destroyed, or they want to start forging their own interests, forging their own identity, independent from the US, independent from Israel, and start, forging links with China, with Russia again, and start becoming a powerful bloc all over again. So this is what he's told Callas, and obviously Callas took this very poorly. And the only thing she's reported on the Western papers is like, oh, China China is supporting Russia, and they said that they cannot afford Russia to lose, otherwise the world will go after China next. And that's the only thing she said. She hasn't mentioned anything else about all the harsh truths that Wang Yi has told the EU. She hasn't mentioned anything about that. But you can see those minutes if you look carefully in the Chinese media and also in the actual minutes of this meeting. Other things discussed was trade and rare earths. Rare earths, is very important to EU's industry as well. And China has put limits on these rare earths about 6 months ago when when Trump decided to put all these tariffs and sanctions on China. So China retaliated by putting limits on rare earths. And these limits included the EU as well. And the reason they included the EU is because EU used to buy Chinese rare earths and they used to sell it to America. So they used to be like the middleman. And the same with India as well. So what China has done, they've blocked EU companies from buying rare earths, and same with Indian companies as well. And they've stopped them from reselling it onto American companies or defense companies. So this is really hurting EU. It's got a very small industrial base anyway because they are pretty much deindustrializing. So any limits on the rare earths will really hurt the EU. So she's brought that up. And she's also brought up the trade imbalance between China and EU. She's also brought up this fake word about overcapacity as well, which Wang Yi dismissed. And also Wang Yi has also mentioned that the reason there is a trade imbalance between EU and China is because EU is following American orders by not selling high-end goods to China. For example, ASML is not allowed to sell high-end, EUV machines, and many other high-end goods, semiconductors and things like that, are not allowed to be sold to China. And Wang Yi mentioned that as well. That's one of the reasons there is a trade imbalance. EU is not allowed to sell high-end goods to China. So, so what else does EU offer to China? Nothing. No, if they cannot sell high-end goods to China, then what else can EU offer? Nothing, because China makes pretty much everything else. So that's what he kind of said, and he also mentioned that there is a trade agreement which the EU has basically frozen for over 5 years, and nothing's going forward with that EU investment. And he said to unfreeze that investment because if they unfroze the investment, there is a lot of good deals to be made between China and EU, and most of it has been already agreed. And all EU needs to do is ratify that agreement, which they have not done for 5 years. So Wang Yi has mentioned that as well. And and then Kala started talking about more about Ukraine and asked China not to help Ukraine, not to help Russia and stuff like that. And Wang Yi has said that there is another meeting, a summit in 2 weeks between China and EU. And he mentioned if you keep mentioning Russia and Ukraine, that summit meeting would be very short. Instead of 2 days, it might last for a couple of hours, and we will cut it short if you keep bringing up Ukraine and Russia. So again, the EU is basically acting very arrogant. They're being very, they think they are the God's universe. The EU is basically the center of the world. Very arrogant, very disrespectful. And that's what Wang Yi has said to Callas, and Callas's her face went all red because of it. So obviously this meeting didn't go too well, and obviously there's another summit meeting happening in 2 weeks, and Wang Yi has said, he said if you carry on doing what you're doing now, then that meeting will also cut short and will not go very well. So a few days later, um, the EU and China then suddenly started placing sanctions on each other. So that meeting with Wang Yi and Callas was supposed to set the groundwork for the meeting in a couple of weeks, but also this meeting was supposed to lower some, you know, tariffs and kind of de-escalate the situation between China and the EU, which is at the moment is quite tense. However, it didn't work. Obviously, the meeting didn't go very well. So China and the EU started placing sanctions on each other. EU started by limiting um, Chinese companies from um, going into the medical tech tech department in the EU. So the Chinese companies weren't allowed to tender, which is worth around 60 billion or something. So in return, Beijing done the same thing. They announced import restrictions on EU medical tech going into China. So Chinese companies basically, rather than buying EU medical tech, they focus on building up their own technology and EU losing business in China. So it's a tit for tat. And also, Beijing set some tariffs on brandy as well. And these brandy tariffs were retaliation from EU, basically adding EV tariffs on Chinese cars, which they haven't really lowered. So China has basically given EU a chance to lower those tariffs, which they haven't. And now these brandy sanctions have come into place. So obviously this meeting didn't really go too well, and if the meeting in 2 weeks, the summit doesn't go very well, I think some of these sanctions will be added more. There'll be more and more sanctions between each other. And also, I want to remind you that EU and United States is currently negotiating a trade deal as well. So if that trade deal doesn't go very well, then the EU and America would probably be sanctioning each other as well over that. So this game that EU is playing is not very a good game. They have been complete puppets of America, and what has it got them? It's got them nothing. They have allowed America to blow up Nord Stream. They have allowed America to deindustrialize them. They have allowed America to stop cheap Russian gas. Now they are allowing America for EU to stop working with China and trading with China. And what has it really got EU? I mean, what is this is obviously not working. The EU is falling. The GDP of every single EU country is very, very low. The euro has been falling. The cost of living in EU is rising. The inflation has been rising. Everything is looking bad for the EU. And if it doesn't change course, EU would probably collapse in the next 5 years. And this is why it's very important for the EU to kind of look after its interests and do what's the best for the EU. And they're not doing that at the moment. Von der Leyen and Callas are obviously puppets of the United States, and they are doing the United States bidding. So the first thing EU needs to do is get rid of these two, and then maybe start building relationships with China, with Russia, and then EU can start growing again. Because if they carry on doing what they're doing now, I do not see the EU lasting more than 5 years. I think they are going to be totally deindustrialized. They will lose business with China as well, and they're already losing business with America because America has decided with Trump to be America first, so they'll probably put sanctions on EU goods and stuff. EU has already alienated themselves by supporting Israel in the Middle East, so the Middle Eastern countries are not going to be trading as much with EU. Um, so EU is not, they've cut all links with Russia, so things are not looking good for the EU. And if things don't change, that's it. You might as well say goodbye to the EU. It's just going to break up and go back to how it was with individual countries. And if that's what they want, then that's what's going to happen. Anyway, guys, let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll see you in the next video.